So I'm so excited to be here today I hear many countries who I'm looking through the virtual lens at. I don't know which one it is, but hello to those joining us online and hello to those joining us in the room today. I'm so excited to be here today with these lovely panelists. They will give themselves a bit more of a bio and introduction. However, I just wanted to mention down there is Jamie Boyd from Deloitte Canada. Welcome to Jamie. We have Senator Colin Deacon from Nova Scotia. I'm very jealous. I wish I was a Nova Scotian. And Ema Akoni, who is from ESDC. As a ESDCer here, the best department, not to brag too much. Oh, I know. And we have Sam Andre here today, who is from the Toronto Metropolitan University. So I will first pass it off to Ema we'll do a bit of an opening remarks and introduction. So I'll kind of go this way down the line, so we'll go Ema and we'll just pass it off as we go, and then we'll start with our first question. Go ahead, Ema.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for bringing us together, Franca. You're right, we do have the best departments. There's nothing better than really serving people and really looking at how we can improve the lives of Canadians. So I love the mandate of ESDC. I've been in the public service for the last 23 years now, basically working on leveraging data and analytics to enhance outcomes for Canadians. So I've worked with many departments, ranging from Statistics Canada to Canada Revenue Agency, also worked in Immigration Canada for 9 years, worked in OSFI, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, before joining ESDC. Really happy to be here, really happy to talk about data and how data is being used to really enhance lives of Canadians and how we need to look at data going forward to make sure that we're inclusive in everything we do. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ema. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes. So Jamie Boyd, I'm a partner at Deloitte Canada. I'm our national digital government leader. I'm also a former public servant. Essentially, my team works to build wonderful services with government clients across Canada. One reason I was so excited about this panel when Franca approached us was really because of some research that we released last week on Tuesday about digital equity. It ends up that a lot of Canadians are having a really rough time when it comes to their digital lives. I think traditionally a lot of times, and we'll get into this in the panel, we'll define digital equity around things like access. It ends up that kind of a definition is totally incomplete. It's not just about broadband and devices, it's also about the ability to participate, and it ends up that a lot of Canadians lack the skills to be able to participate fully. It's also about the ecosystem around them, whether or not they trust that their data is going to be taken care of, whether they're experiencing bias. It ends up that lots of different groups of Canadians are getting bullied, that they're having a really terrible time. And so in that kind of an environment, when you're getting bullied, when you don't have the skills, when you're getting attacked, all those sorts of things, I don't know how excited you're going to be to go and thrive in this digital world, to shop and play and learn and fall in love and do all the things that people do online these days. And so what we would advocate for is really a much more expansive definition of digital equity and really a data-driven approach to try to make that a much healthier place for more Canadians.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. My name's Sam Andre. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Leadership Lab at Toronto Metropolitan, formerly Ryerson University. We're a think tank that works on advancing public policy solutions, and one of our topic areas that we work on is the responsible governance of technology. We've done a lot of work in the past few years on the digital divide, in particular in the city of Toronto. We did a survey mapping the digital divide within the city to try to paint a picture of that the digital divide in Canada is not just an urban-rural problem, although it is, of course, that too, but that there are affordability challenges and access challenges within even Canada's largest city. We've been since doing work with the city on its digital equity policies. The City of Toronto, you may have heard, is considering rolling out its own municipal broadband provider, and so we've been working with them on that. And then to some of Jamie's points, we also do some work on online harms and misinformation and advancing public policy around regulating social media and the like, which maybe we'll get into a bit today. Pleasure to be here.
Hi, My name is Colin Deacon. I'm a senator from Nova Scotia. I'm one of the independent senators. There's now 80% of us are independent in the Senate, and I guess you could call the Senate a 155-year-old think tank that's now resident in the old Ottawa train station. I really like to focus on, and the reason I applied to become a senator is I like to focus on Canada starting to catch up in digital government, starting to catch up in the ability for Canadians to access services no matter where they are. That we have policies that are not just reacting and following the rest of the world and legislation around the digital economy that's trailing the world. We've got to get out in front and create a made in Canada approach. We've got some unique assets in this country that we are not leading the way on with globally. And one of them is our diversity. And that's a strength when you consider where the world is at, that we can show that there's so much that can be done differently. So that's where I like to focus my time and why I'm thrilled to have been invited today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for joining us. So we know that internet and technology is built upon our biases and in some case might even amplify them. This first question is for Ima to my left here. Can you share some systemic issues within this space and how we need to address them?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I really like what Senator Deacon said about diversity is our strength. So when I think about digitalization, data, and really driving services to everybody in Canada, I see Canada as really having the advantage of taking that leadership role in terms of how we look at digital, how we look at inclusiveness on the internet, and how we eliminate some of the systemic barriers in our system for the very reason of what you said, diversity. We have a very diverse population. And when I say diversity in multiple fronts. If you look at the latest census numbers and you look at the breakdown of the demographics, you will see that we have a considerable number of people that are aging in the society. We have different cohorts. When you look at the millennials and you look at the different generations, Generation X, and then if you add that on top of that, you add our immigration. Like if you look at the number of immigrants that are coming into the country, and you dissect that with the composition of the people that are coming, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to take a step back and really look closely at what we're doing in terms of pushing digital. I think there's opportunity for us to start with data, and I know some of you say I'm biased because I'm a chief data officer, but the way I look at it is by looking at the data and the composition of our country, we can look at some of the systemic issues that has been existing in our history and look at how we can shift things going forward. Classical example of this, we've seen it over and over again, where media articles are coming out about policies or things that are being implemented around AI, where we're basically feeding historic data into models, and then we're looking at using that model to do hiring, to screen resumes, and we're just propagating some of these systemic issues. So to me, the advantage, I don't want to dwell too much on the issues. I want to dwell on the opportunity because I really feel that we have an opportunity now to shift some of the historic practices in terms of saying, given our population, given the growth in our population and looking at the dynamism around our population, how can we really make sure that every Canadian, regardless of where you are in this country, we have the data. So we have the data that shows us the urban-rural divide. We have a lot of research. Like every time I've spoken to any community group, the question they ask me is, Ima, you guys have so much data. You've done research after research, 20 years, 30 years, so much research on racialized Canadians, on indigenous populations. So you understand the issues. You understand the issues around the digital divide. You understand the issues around the systemic issues. You can Google it. It's all out there. So the question is, how do we shift? What do we do about it? And my point is, we do have the opportunity now to shift because, like you said, Senator, we're kind of in a state where we still have the opportunity to implement new things and new thoughts around digital. So the question for us, all of us sitting here, is how do we do this in a way that's inclusive? The opportunity is there. And how do we leverage those opportunities as we move forward and think through these things? I'll stop here because I can talk more, but I'll stop here for now.
No, that's great, Yuma. I could listen to you talk for another couple hours on this, so do not worry. But definitely thank you for that first intervention. So my next question will be for Sam and Jamie. So the ongoing COVID pandemic has shown an increased reliance on digital technologies for the maintenance of society, everything around us. So during the past 3 years, where have you seen the most positive growth in regards to digital access in this shift? I know, Jamie, we'll maybe pass it to you first, as you wanted to discuss some findings in the recent Deloitte report, and then you can hand it over to Sam, who wanted to talk about some issues as well.
Sure, that sounds great. I mean, over the course of the pandemic, we did see lots of progress in exciting and interesting ways. You know, if nothing else, people started really prioritizing issues around digital access. We got into a place where often services were only available digitally. We also became quite a bit more aware of some of the equity issues. And I want to share just a little anecdote. This was in one of my previous roles. I got a sort of an urgent phone call, and they said, "Jamie, your website doesn't work." And I was like, well, okay. So like any good public servant, get out my phone, open it up, and it worked great. And so I called back and I said, "No, it's working fine. What are you worried about?" And they said, "Well, no, it's just not working." And I was just racking my mind trying to figure out why on earth it was loading perfectly on my phone, on my computer, and it wasn't working for this person who it wasn't, I'm having trouble accessing some of the features. It doesn't work. So what happened is the website was working, but in an environment of low bandwidth, where they were on a very old device, it was taking something like 50 seconds to load. And we all know that Canadians in general, after about 7 seconds, we give up and go do something else. And so, true to what they were saying, for them, the website was not working. And so, for the first time, I think, we're starting to have more sophisticated conversations about what access really looks like. A few years ago, we started becoming much smarter about things like accessibility and requirements for people who have particular accessibility needs. And we found out if we were not designing our digital services around standards like WCAG AA, AAA compliance, we were systematically choosing to not serve 12% of Canadians. And that's ridiculous, right? And so we became much better at understanding that for accessibility, as an example, it may be necessary for some people, but it's also really convenient for everybody else. You end up having these graphics that render faster, you have simpler language. Jillian had the misfortune of hearing about some of my plain language issues. In government, we would write for grade 14 reading level all the time, and we know that people don't consume anything above grade 6. So why on earth are we not writing simple language, right? And so there were all sorts of things like that we became a little bit more aware of over the course of the pandemic. And then really, I think, grew a more sophisticated understanding of what inclusion can look like in the digital world, because it was the only real world that we had for service delivery. What I think we're also seeing is that although we've made good progress, although there have been good investments from the telecom, from government, from all sorts of different entities in our ecosystem, there continue to be fairly significant barriers. And so we just all need to take a moment and recognize this is a country where there is a robust digital divide. Canada is a country with a digital divide. And when we're sitting here in Ottawa with our fancy iPhones and all that, sometimes we forget about that. And it's not just about rural Canadians, right? So just a couple of little stats. Older Canadians. Less than half of older Canadians feel that they know how to protect themselves online and can do basic digital things like creating online content, populating a Word document or a PowerPoint template, that sort of thing. Like when we talk about digital skills, we're talking about fairly basic tasks here. And only half of older Canadians know how to do those things and how to protect themselves online. Rural Canadians are having a tough time for reasons that we heard about this morning. Racialized Canadians are also having a very difficult time. Within the report that we released last week, take a look at some of the stats that you see there around the prevalence of online bullying. The prevalence for racialized communities and Indigenous Canadians is over twice what it is for Canadians of Caucasian descent, right? And so it gets really quite horrifying in there. Low-income Canadians are having a terrible time also. You talk about the number of devices across Canada. On average, we have one computer per Canadian. You go into low-income households in Toronto, so family income of under $50,000, it goes down to 0.7. How on earth are you going to do an online job and have online learning for your children at the same time if you don't have a device per person, right? And so all of a sudden, we're starting to get a lot more nuanced understanding into the extent to which these are really complex issues. And it isn't simply about the internet, right? 58% of Canadian families have access to high-speed internet. That's not great, but most people do have access to some kind of internet. So it's less about just the availability, and now more and more about the skills, the confidence to participate, and the trust to do so in a way that's going to be respectful and inclusive.
I agree with all of that. And I like the framing of the question, what has been good about the pandemic? Because my instinct is negative all the time. And so it caused me to flip.
Again, I'm not saying the pandemic was good.
No,
I
no,
just
no.
want some
No, I
case
liked
studies
it. I liked
over
it
the past 30 years.
it made you take stock of it made you take stock of what has improved. And I think, you named a few. I think all the investment from government in closing the rural divide is working. Like the gap is closing. Low Earth orbit satellites is bringing internet to places that we were never going to get fiber to. I think that's a exciting thing. I think to the points raised, I think device accessibility, which was a fairly niche thing before the pandemic, has become really important. That school boards are taking it on and making sure that students have access to devices. I think that's really good. And then I think on affordability, I think there's a huge way to go, obviously, but I think in just half of low-income households still do not have access to internet at the target speed, 50 megabits per second, which I think we should sit with that stat, half, right? In urban areas too. And so the government expanding the Connected Families Initiative, which gives $10 or $20 a month internet to include low-income seniors, I think is a good thing. I think that needs to be for all low-income Canadians, but expansion of programming, I think, is a good start. And I think that our conversation, the AI Act was raised. I think, we were talking, the AI Act needs lots of work, but I think at least the federal government is thinking about how to design legislation around harmful use of technology. It's a bit sporadic, it could be better, but I think, the conversation is happening and Canadians are able to react to it. That was not the case 3 years ago, so I think lots of positive things to build on.
Thank you.
I just add one other small point.
Oh,
Is
go
that
ahead,
allowed?
feel
Just-
free.
I think one of the things that was good about the pandemic is it exposed a lot of our warts. And we're a very complacent people, I think, in general, and we're happy to take the services that were provided versus expect the services that could be delivered. And so I think that our Competition Act reform, I think, is part of exposing the problem that we have in telecom in this country. We've got to resolve that problem somehow, and it's not going to be by maintaining the status quo. I think there's been a number of areas where Canada has identified that we need to make changes, and that our analog government is not going to be sufficient in serving our needs as we age and as our population grows and as needs become more and more diverse. So that's just one other thing I think is worthwhile.
Definitely worthwhile. Thank you so much for that intervention. So I will pass this question back to you, Senator Deakin, since we haven't heard from you other than that intervention so far. So as Emma also reminded me, the future of work is here. The future of work is not the future. The future of work is here. But the future of work is also ongoing and evolving. It's exciting some people and frightening others, as we've discussed already from some results from the Deloitte report. So I'll pass this off to Senator Deakin first, followed by Emma, and then to Sam. So what do you see as the future of work when it comes to digital? And how do you see a productive conversation happening around people's legitimate fears when it comes to the future of work?
One of the things we've got to do is we've just got to start moving in that direction. I mean, the old saying, perfection's the enemy of progress. And we've got to start getting better and better. Not good or bad, just get better constantly at what we're doing. But one of the things that I think is most important for a lot of Canadians who are increasingly having to interact with automated systems through their work is making sure those systems are balanced and fair. And gig workers relying increasingly on platforms that may not be actually helping them to hit different incentive levels, but the algorithm may be working against them as they aim for a certain incentive level and payment. There's a lot of anti-competitive practices that can be codified into our online platforms that we've got to be very careful about. So as we go forward, it's really crucial that we have systems that people can trust, and that was a word that Jamie really focused on. If we don't have trust at the foundation of the core platforms of how we govern ourselves and how we work, it really breaks down not just the economy but society. And instead of catalyzing everybody's energy, we're consuming it through the challenges that we've built into our systems. So, for me, it's that fairness, making sure that people who are increasingly going to be relying on digital systems as they deliver on their value that they can deliver in their jobs, having that fairness and that trust and transparency in the system is going to be crucial.
No, I totally agree with that, and I really want to center it around people. So when we talk of future of work, we often focus on technology, and one of the things I see we miss sometimes is the people that are impacted by our decisions and what we're doing. So going back to the data and the research, you cited some of that research, Jamie. When you look at the outcomes of the different categories of people and their experiences with the future of work and some of our conversations about the future of work, you will find that people are impacted so differently if you look at the different demographics. So if you look at women, for example, with young kids who have gone through what they went through in the pandemic, where there were no daycares and they still had to go into the workforce, some of them had to actually drop out of the workforce because they had no way of taking their kids to daycare. So as we look at the future of work, I think, again, it's an opportunity in the way we look at it. For example, research after research has shown us that racialized people have a different experience in the workplace. So when we look at the future of work, are there opportunities there for us to tweak their experiences? Also, we look at our aging workforce. Just the other day, I was speaking with somebody who worked in the public service for 40 years. I learned so much from that person, just in terms of how we need to think through our systems. And I've often asked myself the question as we look at future of work, how can we leverage the experiences of our population that's so rich? We have a very rich population of people who have a lot of experience. And how can we leverage this as we look at the future of work? Are there ways that we can scale this up as we look at digital? You talked about fairness. When we talk about fairness, we have a lot of experience, again, with the research. Jamie, you were pumping out those stats. I mean, I don't know how you memorized all that, but you were citing those numbers, and I'm saying, okay, so as we look at digitalization going forward, as we look at just thinking of future of work going forward, how can we put this into practice? How can we take those numbers and say, okay, we want to make people have a better experience in the workplace. We want to lead to a more optimized Canada. We want to lead to more optimization in how we operate. So how can we do this? But to do this, we have to go back to people. We have to go back to the data, what the data is telling us. And we have to go back to what you said about trust. How do we center all this in people trusting the system? So to me, it's a question of going back to the people, understanding some of all these studies we've undertaken through the years, and then putting that data into action as we move forward.
I just wanted to add a bit about work from home, and I think we recently did a survey of 2,000 Canadians who are working from home just in October, and so it's on the top of my mind, and it's a game changer. People love it. People are getting more done, they're less stressed, they have better work-life balance, and so for the 40% of Canadians who have access to that flexibility, they really appreciate it. I think there's two downsides. One, people are citing they have less connections with their colleagues, so how to maintain that sort of team dynamic. And I think second is 60% of Canadians don't get that flexibility in their work. How do we, to the Senator's point, make sure that the people who are interacting with different types of work, that resentment doesn't grow as the feeling of work becomes completely different. And then I think third, though, for the people who are working from home, some employers, and our recent data suggests it might be about 15%, are using quite invasive technologies to monitor their workers from home. Things like keystroke monitoring, webcam monitoring, screen capture, things that feel quite invasive for being in your home. Ontario has taken some steps to regulate that through transparency, requiring employers to tell their employees that they're doing this. I don't think that goes quite far enough, but it's an interesting first step. But wrestling, what is appropriate in that context, I think, is something that we'll need to wrestle with.
Thank you. All right, so our next question here is a question on intersectionality. So for those who are not familiar with that term, it was a term coined by Black feminist scholar Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who has done some amazing work if you have not interacted with Kimberly Crenshaw's work in the past. So again, learning from work I've done with the transgender community, one of the things that they've mentioned is if you have a brain, you have a bias. And I think that that's so important to remember about we have a brain, we have a bias, but we also bring different barriers, different privileges to the conversations that we are having. So this is a bit of a two-parter question I have here for everyone, and we'll, I guess we'll start off with Jamie for this one, and I guess we'll go down that way, and then we'll end with Emma over here. So part A of this question, I'll read them both out. So as mentioned above, all of us bring a unique perspective to this conversation. As such, everyone brings unique intersectional barriers, privileges, and needs to the technological and digital spaces. Where are spaces online that need to be fixed so that everyone can enjoy a positive relationship with the world? And can you give either case studies or solutions that you have seen in order to solve these spaces?
Yeah, great question, Jillian, and I'm glad that we had a pre-call because it allowed me to go and go look up some of the data. This is the beauty of actually having gone and done some research and asked Canadians their views on these things. And so for me, to respond to this question, sort of what are the considerations or the barriers around inclusion from an intersectional perspective, I'd highlight three things. The ability to sort of participate with confidence, the ability to develop skills so that if you aren't currently participating with confidence, you could, and then data. So I'll address each one very briefly. So the ability to participate with confidence. We asked people that we surveyed as part of the research to identify themselves, their gender. And people who identify as women feel 42% of them, feel safe expressing opinions on the internet, as opposed to 34% of men. So women feel less safe presenting opinions. When it comes to cybersecurity, this is also a dynamic. So 59% of women feel that they can protect themselves against cybersecurity incidents compared to 69% of men. So women in general feel less, or people who identify as women feel less safe. And so that suggests that there is a real need to think through, is there a group of our population that is just systematically being denied the ability or underserved when it comes to having that confidence in the digital world? And it would appear that that is indeed the case. That's bad, but perhaps even worse is that across Canada, we don't know how to go and develop those skills so that we can participate with confidence. So even amongst young people that you would expect to be sort of digital natives and whatnot, I'm sort of more accustomed to participating in the digital world. Only 44% of people under the age of 35 feel that they are prepared to thrive in the digital world and have the skills, right? And so that would suggest that there is a real opportunity for us to be more decisive in Canada around doing things like setting standards around this is what somebody needs to know how to do to participate in the digital world. Or think about a national curriculum, for example. Right now, we don't even have province-wide curricula when it comes to digital skills. So it's often left on the shoulders of an individual high school teacher. And if your kid happens to have a great teacher, fabulous. And if they don't, well, it's kind of up to them. And if we truly are thinking about, as the senator rightly suggests, fulfilling our potential as a digital nation, well, perhaps we would want the people of Canada to be able to take advantage of being a digital nation. And that is not something that we are decisively or systematically investing in as a country right now. So I would suggest that spaces that need to be improved, we need to be more transparent around the data around how different gender identities are not having a great time. We need to be more decisive about skills development for all genders. And then thirdly, I think we do need to think about data management in this regard. Ima, I think, made a wonderful point. Not too long ago, we got very excited, and I think Canada was world leading in talking about algorithmic transparency and algorithmic bias. What about the data? You put biased data into a fabulously designed algorithm, you still get biased outcomes. And so I think some of the initiatives that we've been seeing, for example, in BC with the Anti-Racism Data Act, in the UK with the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, we're starting to see governments thinking about data ethics. I know Jillian and a few years ago we got involved in a feminist open data standard, and people kind of looked at us like we were a little bit nuts, and then thought, wow, okay, this could truly be transformative for Canada and the world. And so I think that we do need to get quite a bit more thoughtful when it comes to how we manage the data that feeds our decisions.
I'll maybe raise, just because it hasn't come up yet, issues around First Nations and data sovereignty. I think the access gaps, access to infrastructure at the 50-10 speed target on First Nations reserves, only a third have access to it, compared to 99% of urban people, and about half of rural Canadians. So the access gaps remain stark. A stat I sometimes like to drop because it continues to shock me is the fastest internet you can get in Nunavut is 5 megabits per second, not 50, but 5. But beyond just access, a group called First Nations Technology Council of BC, who I think is doing a lot of great work around data sovereignty and OCAP principles, ownership, control, access, possession. First Nations people want to have control over how their data and their information is being used, and we don't really have the structures yet from a public policy perspective to make that happen. So more support for community-owned networks as we're rolling out LEO satellites, how to embed that as we're rolling out the technology, I think is a conversation that is starting but is not yet being taken up as seriously as it needs to be.
I'll try and follow with another point that equals the ones we've already heard, but for me, one of the biggest risks and concerns that I have is that there is a perception that proper and fully inclusive consultation slows everything down and takes longer. What it does, if you take that approach, is you make less mistakes up front, and it's really hard to retrofit inclusivity into a system that's already been designed to be exclusive. And so for me, that's, we've got to change our attitude. We cannot be satisfied with having manels, that are just one gender perspective, or snowstorms where you have, everybody that's just got one racial perspective. We've got to start to get really inclusive in the process of design from the earliest stages. I can't believe the number of legislative initiatives where the consultation is in Ottawa. That's where it occurred. And it's really hard to start to correct the problems that have been designed in from the outset if you haven't taken the approach that truly values the enormous opportunity that's unlocked when you do take a fully inclusive approach. Because that's the system that's going to last. That's a system that you can incrementally improve over time, but you can't fundamentally change an exclusive system, and you've got to start over again. So it's, for me, that would be the point, is we've got to start prioritizing an inclusive process from the beginning of our legislative and technology development processes. If we don't, we're going to take longer in the end. So let's just do it right to begin with.
So that's an excellent point. As you were speaking, my mind went to my mother because I've watched my mother use the internet. So she doesn't fit quite well with some of the stats you mentioned, Jamie. She's the kind of person that's always using computers. She writes books, so she's very familiar with using the internet and using computers and digital. But the challenge is when she goes on some websites, she falls into that trap where, because of the way web pages is designed and some of the questions that are being asked, she would often put her information, her personal information, at risk. And because of the lens that I apply, Jamie, to your point about data management, I apply the lens of data management and think of all the potential uses of that data. The way that data could be used to harm her based on the information she's entered into the internet. So to your point, I think it is so essential to include by default when you're designing a system. And when I say include from different perspectives. The policy perspective also, people who work on the data side, not just the tech side. So there's a lot of focus on, we need to build this system. So I need the most talented tech person to build this system. And we forget that because of how we've become so digital and move forward on some of these areas, risk has become so horizontal and everything seems to intersect. So the point about inclusion, from the different disciplines are so important. Inclusion from our demographics, like if you look at our population, making sure that when we're designing something, we're representing the people that we're supposed to be serving and the people who should be accessing some of these services is extremely key. And one of the other things that also concerns me, I'm trying not to list all my concerns here, but one of the things I think we really need to keep front of mind is the risk, the risk around data, because often it's forgotten. We focus a lot about algorithms, about systems. We forget that today, data collected might be used for one thing, but 2 years from now, because of the growth in technology and digitization, it could be used for something else. So I think it's a careful balance of really understanding the needs of citizens, the needs of Canadians, balancing innovation, but also doing it in a way that's very, very intentional and really understanding some of the potential risks and opportunities that we face. And thank you again, Franca, for bringing us together to have the conversation, because I think that's one of the things we need to do. We need to have more conversations, and we need to think through this with diverse audiences and diverse perspectives.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to build off of what Sam was saying about OCAP training. If you haven't done OCAP, I know Jamie, who for those of you might know, is my old boss, by the way, actually suggested that our entire team do OCAP training back in the day, and it was part of her performance agreement to make that happen. So that's a really great training. I suggest that to everyone in government and outside of government. It's online, done with Algonquin College and the First Nations Institute.
First Nations Information Governance Center.
Governance Center. Thank you. Sorry. There's two of them and I mixed them up in my brain. So I would highly suggest anyone to do that. I will also give more homework / training to look up Gender-Based Analysis Plus. It's free. It's by the Government of Canada. It's not a new thing. It's been around since 1995. Also look up the works of, as I mentioned, Kimberly Crenshaw, Zoe Marks, Teddy Stavros from the Harvard Institute. And also look up the work of Dr. Rachel Zellers, who's a Black feminist scholar as well. I think it's really important to get those bases on there too. I really enjoyed the term snowstorm. I haven't heard that. I've heard mantle, but I'm definitely going to steal that term in terms of snowstorms. And I think it's important what everyone has mentioned on here, and it's important to reiterate as well that I do a lot of work in terms of talking about white feminism, white supremacy, anti-Black racism, and it's everyone's responsibility, and everyone has something that they can contribute in a positive way. You don't have to be the person out in front. You can learn to stand beside, learn to lend your voice to part of a conversation in order to move things forward. So I think that that's all what we're what we're mentioning here. And finally, just on what you had said, Eamon, and what you had said, Jamie, as well, my grandmother actually deleted her Facebook this week. She'd been hacked so many times on Facebook and just decided to remove herself from the conversation, which is very sad because it's a place that she had enjoyed being. So I think that that's an anecdotal, even though it's just one case study. I mean, you can't make evidence out of one case study, but I think it's important to mention the real world consequences of some of these things too. So the second to last question we have here, and I guess I'll start with Emma and go the opposite way this time, all the way down to the senator. So what does success look like to you, and how do we measure that in this conversation?
It's tough to say what success is because we'll continue to evolve. And when I say evolve is the population will continue to grow. It will continue to shift. Like I said, if you look at the latest census numbers and the projections, the face of Canada continues to change. So for us, it will be very important that we continue to meet the evolving needs. One of the things that is front of mind is even the question about vulnerability. How do we get to that ideal state where we're able to meet the needs of the most at risk and vulnerable in society? And as we know, vulnerability is dynamic. Somebody can be vulnerable tomorrow, and so it will continue to shift. So to me, ideal state will be for us to really be intentional in anything we do, in anything we design, and always keep people at the center, the interests of people and the people that we're supposed to be serving and delivering these services to. And the only way for us to do that is to almost shift the mindset from one of tech, very focused on tech, to how do we make sure that tech is aligned with the interest of Canadians. And I think that's going to be an ongoing discussion and something that we'll continue to think through and work through.
I think it's when we get to a user experience that works for all Canadians, and we haven't had to. We've just naturally versus stopped and said, oh, we have to make sure we've got everybody at the table here to hear the different diversity of voices. We've actually embraced the need to hear the diversity of voices in order to have a better user experience. And I'm lucky, two of my staff are here, Benedict Arthur and Vlada Alexenko. Vlada has helped us to understand the DIA app in Ukraine and written a report for us. You can find it on my website. And we had a great overview with one of the early engineers of the program. But the objective of that program was to create the most convenient government in the world by having your government services available on your phone and through your website as you saw fit. They are used to being cyber attacked regularly from the Russians. They manage that extremely well, but they have created a digital portal into their government that no matter where Ukrainian citizens are in the world, they've got a direct connection with their government and the services that they need to access. And they started with a user experience being at the core of it. We want the most convenient services, the most convenient government in the world. And that to me is, so if you can start with that UX at the center of your mind and say that's got to be relevant to every Canadian in each of the diversity of communities we have in this country, there's a way to solve the problems. There's a way to get into rural communities with those who are not digitally comfortable through hubs. There's a way to reach communities in different ways. We can solve these problems, but we've got to start with the end in mind and then get the political determination to get there, which is the one thing that is the biggest barrier that we're lacking.
For me, success looks like every Canadian who wants it has the confidence and the abilities to thrive in the digital world, to access services how they want. And that, that might mean online. For many of us, it will. But for those of us who prefer not to go online, it means that the service provider has excellent digital supports. When it comes to government services, I'm not an advocate for digital only. There should be no wrong door. You should be able to phone in if that's what you prefer. And the person on the other end of the line should give you the exact same information that you would get on the website or a chatbot or wherever else. And so this idea of having sort of no wrong door for providing services to Canadians, I think, is critical. But those people who do want to access anything, services, friends, whatever it might be, Facebook, through digital channels, they should have the ability to develop those skills. And right now, so many Canadians are being served by the most expensive tech support in the world, which is people like me going and spending every Sunday evening helping my mom deal with her things on her computer. I'm sure that all of us of a certain age, you go home, check on your parents, or you check on your neighbors or whatever, and they've got a list of, the many random things, they've deleted their bank accounts and they've done all sorts of magical things you didn't even know were possible. But, it's kind of funny, and it's sort of sweet that we're able to take care of other generations in that way. But that is not a national skill strategy, right? And so I think that we do need to be quite a bit more decisive about thinking about how we allow those people who want to participate in the digital world, how do we enable them to do that? And I think to the Senator's point, it does have a lot to do with designing around needs. We, day in, day out, we build technology products in the part of the firm where I work, and we build services. And what we find is that it's not more expensive to start with the user. There are a lot of misconceptions. We spend a lot of time trying to understand human needs, and then we design around those needs. And it's a wonderful way of de-risking a lot of our activity. And I'd be more than happy to tell you lots more about that. That's sort of the bread and butter of a large part of our firm, really built around human-centered design. And it's about inclusion, it's about respect, but it's also about basic efficiency. And so that's the last thing that I think we really need if we want to be successful. We need to mobilize an ecosystem around wonderful services that are inclusive, that are respectful of the taxpayer, that are respectful of the diversity of our country, and it will take an ecosystem. I don't think that we're in a world where we can just say, okay, telcos, run with this, or okay, government, run with this. We need to understand the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with around digital equity, and then all come around and figure out how we can all contribute to ultimately a more thriving nation.
It's funny, everyone's referencing their parents. My mom just retired and decided to join Twitter, but had avoided social media up until now. So you're telling me I have things to look forward to, which is interesting and exciting. What I was going to say is, you measure what matters, and I think in this country we have set really specific targets about the rollout of access to broadband at 50/10 speed, and I keep referencing that because I think it's an important metric. 95% and 100% by the state. Those are important, but it's a bit of telco capture, I think, which is, well, if it's available, the check box is there. It's like, if anybody can afford it, does it matter? Well, that's for somebody else to worry about. And I think we need a complementary set of measures, which is every Canadian who wants to your point, who wants to, needs to be able to access it. And then I think that would sharpen the minds of, how do we design subsidy programs or whatnot to make sure that that's true. Like, if we're going to accept that everyone has to be able to access the internet, and we're going to have a market-based system, which I think is an accepted fact here in Canada, it's going to require subsidies. Like, those two facts can't work together otherwise. And so I think a set of measures that is honest about all of that, is what I think Canada needs.
All right, thank you so much. So we are almost, even though I just keep getting lost, being like, yeah, let's keep going. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, look at the time. So for our last kind of I'm going to call fire round question, I'll get folks to say their closing remarks, and then also give a shout out to someone who's an unsung hero of the digital space, who perhaps should be more well known, who, again, I know that, pardon? Q&A as well, yes. So give a shout out to someone who's maybe not here today or not part of this space, who more people should know about. So I'll start off with the Senator, and we'll go back this way, and then we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A.
I really dream of our innovators and our regulators and policy development folks getting closer together. There's this sense in Ottawa that you've got to stay away from those with shared interests and have something completely independent. And we'll never break through the levels that we need to break through in terms of accelerating change in this country if we don't get innovators a lot closer to regulators and policy development folks. So that would be my dream, and I want to give a couple of examples of why I think that's important. And really, for me, it's open banking was what first showed me where our regulators are just not understanding, and our policymakers are not understanding the opportunity that proper use of our financial data can bring. And it's around credit scores. And credit scores, you could only improve your credit score by buying a bank-based product. You couldn't improve your credit score by paying your rent regularly every month, year in, year out. You couldn't improve your credit score by paying your telco bill year in, month out. That didn't go to your credit score. It does now. It can now. And it means that new Canadians and marginalized Canadians get a chance to start to participate in a system that has been very exclusive. And so many social benefits, for all of us in society come from when we really look at the opportunities that innovators can bring to us and have a market-based approach facilitated by government. And so for me, that's the road ahead that I really hope to see us pursue. And I'm really failing on the last point that you've asked me about as an unsung hero. There's so many, and I'm going to fail there, and I apologize.
That is okay. You can either get your staff or yourself to tweet it out afterwards. There you go. Some homework for you, Senator. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, since you didn't give one, I'm going to give two then. So I want to echo First Nations Technology Council. If people aren't familiar with them, I think they're doing amazing work. I also think the work we've done on devices has been really illuminating. I think Computers for Success is an organization that worked with a lot of CEOs of big companies through the pandemic to take excess devices, refurbish them, and get them out to students and communities. I think they're doing amazing work. And I think too, we, in the digital kind of equity and access space, sometimes forget about the critical role that public libraries have always played in this fight. And an extremely important role in, especially for the unhoused and folks who are never going to have access to like a stable home internet connection. And I think they're doing amazing work too.
That's great. Two closing comments. Please take a look at the Digital Equity Report. If you Google Digital Equity Deloitte Canada, it's the first one that'll come up. We put a lot of work into it and had a wonderful advisory council, including the First Nations Technology Council. And we have primary research coming out of Canada, as opposed to the previous data that we often had to cite that was from other countries. So please do take a look at the report, and we would love to hear your comments on it. A second closing thought is really let's think about focusing truly on the users. I think we've gotten to a point in Canada within the public service, within the technology ecosystem, where we understand the value of human-centered design, because the technology services just don't work very well otherwise. I would love to apply that same kind of lens to how we develop our policy landscape in Canada and truly design around human needs, respecting the diversity of this country and the evidence, the data. So those would be my two remarks. Let's sort of paint on a larger canvas, if you will, when it comes to human-centered design, and then please take a look at the report. My heroes, I'll flag two. I live in Victoria, and I'm a former public servant within the BC Public Service. I would love to introduce Canada more broadly to MLA Rakna Singh, who was the MLA who drove BC's brand new anti-racism data legislation that today in BC is law. And it's the first piece of legislation that I'm aware of globally that has had that level of ambition. I would love for more people to be familiar with that. And the other is Erin Corsten at the First Nations Information Governance Council and Center, and she's been championing OCAP and has the new First Nations data strategy, and just such a wonderful advocate for very pragmatic approaches to driving inclusion in this country.
No, I'll end by saying that today is proof that we have a lot of talent and we have a lot of opportunity to really shift things in the right direction, and make sure that, to your point, to what everybody has said here, we're looking at the people, the end users, the impact, and just being more intentional in what we're doing in terms of meeting people's needs across this amazing Canada. So I think we have the opportunity, we have the people, and I'm just looking forward. I get excited when I think about the opportunity. So really looking forward to what happens next and some of the more conversations and actions we can take to improve the lives of people across the country. In terms of the heroes, honestly, and the sheroes and just everybody out there, in the last 2-3 years, many people who haven't worked in the public service might not be aware, but we went through a journey, a very difficult journey of trying to really meet the needs of people under very difficult situations that people dealing with their own personal crisis had to deliver even through that. So my thanks and my appreciation will really be to everybody who had to do that over the last few years, and it's not over yet. We're still trying to really work as hard as we can to meet all the evolving needs. So those are my heroes, like people that are really putting in the work every day. Some of them are in the digital space, some of them are not. Some of them are just speaking to Canadians on the phone across the country, but they're doing what they can, to meet people's needs across this great country. So that's who my thanks and appreciation and really acknowledgement goes to at this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We might have time for one question. Perhaps if there's 2 burning questions, we can take them at once. Any questions? Just don't come up higher. Yes, question over here and question over there.
Not a question, just a small correction. Things aren't quite as bad in Iqaluit as they make out. Starlink is now receivable in Iqaluit, so you have up to 200 megabits download.
We had a gentleman in Iqaluit join a session in the metaverse recently. I was thrilled.
Thanks. You covered a lot of ground in a short time, and I appreciate the discussion. One thing I wanted to flag and maybe get your reaction to, during the course of COVID, we moved the courts online. It appears they're going to stay online to some extent, and by online I mean online hearings. We know that had the effect of leaving behind people in areas where they couldn't get enough connectivity to do a Zoom hearing, and people who don't have the expensive hardware that it takes just to connect and have broadband access and submit documents electronically, all of that. So that looks like it's going to be a chronic problem, and I'm wondering the extent to which folks are thinking about it and what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Nope, I think we have one more question, and then we will answer both of them at the same time. Do you want to just let me know your question? I can repeat it into here.
He's coming.
We have a microphone. Sorry. Did not see the floating microphone.
Okay, not a problem. I have a couple of questions. First of all, so I think you said there was 51% of Canadians that have access to the digital economy. Was it 51?
58% of households have access to the minimum internet speeds established by the CRTC.
So that still
50
leaves
megabits.
like almost 40% of the population that don't have access. Like
They don't have access or slow internet.
Okay. So then that leaves like marginalized communities such as people living in poverty, people living in homelessness, elderly people. So I was wondering, is there any accountability that's been put in place? And I don't know who to ask that question to. Is there any accountability mechanism in place to assure ability to participate in the digital economy, right? And another question is the data that you talked about that you've been collecting. Are they aggregated? Meaning, do we qualify the different groups, specifically to target their needs? So these are my 2 questions.
Panelists, feel free to take either question.
In terms of accountability, no, there isn't any. And that's one of the challenges I have, is that we often deliver public programs in isolation, and we do not deliver them with an accountability metric tied to them too often. And I'm a real believer that we've got to catalyze private sector solutions in every significant issue that we're facing in our society, just about. And this is one in particular where we have to get really creative. And I look at Telsat Canada being one of the leaders in the world in satellite communications in the 80s, and yet we're laggards when it comes to what should be a leading capacity in our country, which is to deliver satellite-based internet. So for me, there isn't accountability, and it has to change. And one of the challenges we have is our 3 levels of government. Everybody goes, oh, it's their fault. And we've got to find a way to stop that.
I'll take the question about the courts. I think that's an excellent question. I think you could, the case in point is the courts, but we could talk about virtually any government service. There are certain parts of government services that are incredibly inefficient. And because you mentioned the courts, I'll give you an anecdote. There was, within the government of BC at one point, there was a desire to digitize parts of the courts process. And the burning platform was, okay, well, what's so bad about the status quo? And what was so bad was that there wasn't any online tool for queuing for service. And so what people were doing is they were lining up in the courthouse to access services. And the lineup was so long that they just abandoned their shoes. So there was a lineup of shoes holding their spot in line. And that was the image that finally catalyzed some action. A deputy minister had a court process and went in and said, what are all these shoes? And it says, well, that's the queue for service function. It's like, you can build that online very, very easily, right? Like, I'm sure that many people in this room could set up a queue for service function within, an hour or so. And so it's a very easy online tool to build. And even if you aren't able to use that, you don't have the digital skills, you don't have the connectivity, imagine how much easier it would be to phone in and say, hey, can you add my name to the queue? Rather than having to stand in line sometimes for days. There were certain services there was one in particular where on average it was requiring people to go in 6 times to file paperwork because there were controlled vocabularies, for example, and so people were making errors in the forms, they were getting sent back. So design processes are going to be helpful no matter what. I think what we would see is real advantages associated with optimizing the processes, even if the first point of contact isn't necessarily digital. So another example would be calling into a contact center. There have been government contact centers in the past that have been accused of providing different information depending on which contact center operator you get. That makes no sense. So those people were not necessarily supported by the kind of robust digital supports that we would expect. So the digitization of the process can be independent of the individual experience of the person at the end. And I think that that's likely going to be an imperative when it comes to equity issues where, discovery or whatever might be more challenging to do in sort of a remote environment.
And to the last question on data, we work very closely with Statistics Canada to assess the uptake rates of our programs. And from that, we can see where some of the challenges are in terms of people who are accessing benefits that they need and they deserve. So we're pushing the envelope and continuing to work with StatsCan to get to more disaggregated data. But for now, like just in terms of your question, we're able to know or have an idea of who we're missing, but we need to dig more into the data to be able to target people at a more precise fashion in terms of getting them to the benefits they need. So work is ongoing. I can talk with you offline about it just to tell you some of the work we're doing on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian, Emma, Jamie, Sam, and Senator Deakin. I'm going to introduce the affordability panel.